The Kansas sun was a merciless tyrant, scorching the endless wheat fields with the relentless golden glare. Clara trudged through the towering stalks, her boots sinking into the dry, uneven earth, each step a battle against exhaustion. Dust clung to her faded calico dress, the hem frayed from days of maybe weeks of walking. Her canteen, slung across her shoulder, was empty, its leather strap chafing her sunburned skin. Her lips were cracked, her throat parched, and her vision swam with the heat's cruel mirage. She didn't know how long she'd been moving, only that she couldn't stop, not yet. Not when the shadow of her past loomed behind her, a specter she could neither outrun nor face. Clara was 24, but the weight of her life made her feel ancient, each memory a stone in her chest. She'd fled her husband's farm in Missouri 3 weeks ago, slipping out under a moonless sky, her heart pounding louder than the creak of the barn door. She hadn't looked back, not even when his drunken curses echoed in her mind, promising retribution. All she had was a vague hope of a new life somewhere west, where the horizon might finally offer mercy. The wheat fields stretched on, an ocean of gold that swayed in the hot breeze, whispering secrets she couldn't decipher. Her legs trembled, her knees threatening to give way with every step. She clutched the stalk for balance, its sharp edge slicing her palm, but she barely felt the sting. Her world was narrowing, the edges of her vision darkening like a storm rolling in. She'd eaten her last crust of bread 2 days ago, stolen from a baker's cart in a nameless town. Water had run out yesterday. The horizon, once a beacon of promise, now mocked her with its unattainable distance. Clara's breath hitched, a dry rasp that sounded foreign to her own ears. She stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root, and the ground rushed up to meet her. The wheat folded around her as she fell, a soft, suffocating cradle. She lay there, staring at the sky through the swaying stalks, her body too heavy to move. This is it, she thought, her mind foggy but resolute. This is where it ends. The world dimmed, and she surrendered to the darkness, her last conscious thought a fleeting wish for peace. A shadow crossed her face, blocking the sun's cruel glare. Clara stirred, her eyelids fluttering against the weight of exhaustion. She thought it was a dream at first, the silhouette of a man looming over her, his broad-brimmed hat cutting a sharp outline against the sky. He knelt beside her, his movements deliberate but gentle, his calloused fingers pressing against her wrist to find a pulse. "You're a long way from anywhere, ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady, like the rumble of a distant storm. Clara tried to speak, to ask who he was, where she was, but her throat was a desert, her words trapped behind cracked lips. She could only blink up at him, her vision hazy but catching the details of his fascia sun-weathered skin, a jaw carved from years of hard living, and eyes that held a quiet depth, like a still pond hiding secrets beneath its surface. He was a cowboy, she realized, though not the kind from dime novels. His clothes were worn, his boots scuffed, his hands marked by labor. But there was something in his gaze, something that made her feel seen, not as a broken thing, but as someone who might still have a chance. Without a word, he slipped one arm under her shoulders and another under her knees, lifting her as if she weighed no more than a child. Clara's head lolled against his chest, the steady thump of his heartbeat anchoring her to the world. He carried her through the wheat, the stalks parting before him like a sea before a ship. His steps were sure, unhurried, as if he'd walked this path 1,000 times. The rhythm of his stride was a lullaby, and Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind a tangle of fevered images as her husband's raised fist, the cold Missouri nights, the endless fields. But each time she surfaced, the cowboy was there, his presence a quiet constant. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he was taking her, but for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. The journey seemed to stretch on forever, though it couldn't have been more than a mile. The wheat gave way to a clearing, and Clara glimpsed a small homestead through her half-open eyes, a weathered cabin of rough-hewn logs, flanked by a corral with 2 horses and a scattering of cottonwood trees. A windmill creaked lazily in the breeze, its blades casting long shadows across the packed earth. The cowboy carried her inside, the cool shade of the cabin a balm to her fevered skin. He laid her on a narrow cot, its wool blanket scratchy but clean. The room was sparse, practical: a table, a single chair, a stove in the corner, and shelves lined with tins and jars. A rifle hung above the door, its barrel glinting faintly and the light filtering through a single window. The cowboy moved with purpose, fetching a tin cup from a shelf and filling it with water from a pitcher. He held it to her lips, supporting her head as she drank. The cool liquid a shock to her parched throat. She coughed, then drank again, greedy for every drop. "Slow now," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You'll make yourself sick." Clara nodded weakly, her eyes meeting his for the first time. They were hazel, flecked with gold, and carried a weight she couldn't name a grief, maybe, or resolve. He set the cup aside and sat on a stool beside the cot, watching her with a patience that felt foreign to her. She wanted to ask his name, to thank him, but her body betrayed her, pulling her back into a heavy sleep. When she woke, the light had shifted, the sun lower in the sky. The cowboy was still there, stoking the stove, his movements quiet so as not to disturb her. A pot simmered, filling the air with the smell of broth, simple but comforting. Clara's stomach growled, and she realized she was truly alive for the first time in days. He brought her a bowl of broth, thin but warm, and helped her sit up. "Name's Eli," he said, as if answering a question she hadn't asked. "This is my place. You're welcome to stay till you're strong enough to move on." Clara sipped the broth, her hands trembling around the bowl. "Clara," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steadying. "I'm Clara." Eli nodded, as if her name was all he needed to know for now. He didn't ask where she'd come from or why she'd been half dead in his fields. He just sat, his silence an invitation rather than a demand. Clara ate slowly, each spoonful a small victory, and as the warmth spread through her, she felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years: a hope. Over the next few days, Clara's strength began to return. Eli was a quiet presence, tending to his chores but always nearby. He showed her the homestead's rhythm, feeding the horses, mending fences, checking the windmill. The work was hard, but there was a simplicity to it that soothed her. She learned that Eli had been alone here for years, ever since a fever took his wife and daughter. He spoke of them sparingly, but when he did, his voice softened, and Clara saw the man beneath the cowboy's stoic exterior. She shared her own story in fragments, the words coming easier with each passing day. She told him of her husband, Amos, whose love had soured into cruelty, whose fists had left marks she still carried. She told him of her escape, the fear that drove her west, the desperation that had landed her in the wheat fields. Eli listened, his eyes never leaving her face, his silence a kind of absolution. One morning, Eli handed her a bridle and led her to the corral. "You ever ride?" he asked. Clara shook her head, her hands twisting nervously in her skirt. He introduced her to a gentle mare named Daisy, showing her how to saddle the horse, how to sit tall and move with the animal's rhythm. Her first attempts were clumsy, her body stiff with fear, but Eli was patient, guiding her with quiet encouragement. "You're doing fine," he said, his hand steadying the reins. "Just trust her. She'll carry you." Clara felt a flash of pride when she managed a short ride around the corral, the wind tugging at her hair. For the first time, she felt not like a fugitive, but like a woman with a future. The days turned into weeks, each one knitting Clara's strength back together. She and Eli worked side by side, their routines intertwining like the routes of the cottonwoods. They repaired a sagging fence, planted a small patch of vegetables, and sat together in the evenings, watching the stars emerge one by one. Clara learned to read the sky, to spot the North Star and trace the constellations Eli named. He taught her to find water in the wild, to dig for it in the dry creek beds that crisscrossed the plains. She taught him small things in return: how to mend a tear in his shirt with neat stitches, how to braid the horse's manes so the flies wouldn't bother them. Their conversations were spare, but every word carried weight, every glance a silent understanding. Clara began to notice the way Eli moved through the world, with a quiet strength that didn't demand attention but commanded respect. She saw it in the way he calmed a spooked horse, in the careful way he cleaned his rifle, in the gentleness of his hands when he bandaged a cut on her palm. He was a man who'd been broken and rebuilt, his edges smoothed by time but not softened. Clara wondered what he saw in her: a runaway, a woman with nothing but a battered heart and a stubborn will. Yet he never treated her as less, never made her feel like a burden. Instead, he gave her space to heal, to find her footing, to become someone new. One evening, As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the wheat fields in shades of fire, Clara stood at the edge of the homestead, her arms crossed against the cooling air. Eli joined her, his hat tilted back, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "You're ready," he said, his voice carrying a certainty she hadn't heard before. Clara looked at him, her heart a tangle of gratitude and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. She knew he wasn't just talking about her physical strength, but about the resilience she'd found, the courage to face whatever lay beyond the fields. She nodded, her throat tight. "I am," she said, and meant it. The next morning, Eli saddled Daisy and packed a satchel with bread, cheese, and a canteen of water. He handed her a folded map, its edges worn but clear, marking it where west to a town where she could start fresh. Clara took it, her fingers brushing his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. She wanted to say something to thank him, to ask him to come with her, but the words caught in her chest. Instead, she mounted Daisy, her hands steady on the reins, her posture straight. Eli stepped back, his eyes meeting hers one last time. "You'll do all right, Clara," he said. "You're stronger than you know." She rode out, the wheat fields stretching around her, no longer a prison but a path. She didn't look back, though she felt Eli's gaze on her until the horizon swallowed her. The cowboy had carried her when she couldn't stand, had given her shelter and strength, but now she was ready to walk her own road. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Clara wasn't afraid. She carried Eli's quiet faith in her, a light to guide her through whatever lay ahead, and as the sun rose higher, she urged Daisy forward, toward a new life she could finally claim as her own.